All right, so we are going to build on the theme of last time. We saw some problems that contain these comma, ing type modifiers. These sentences will also generally have some kind of issue with overall structure, at least one or the other of those. So, theme from last time, we're going to continue it. The GMAT prep stuff, I mean, there's like 1,000 questions in there, so not in any significant sense. The question is, will the workshop, if you see these questions on your free exam, will it affect it? I mean, not really, and definitely not within the range of doubt anyway of the test. Remember that these tests have a standard deviation of like 40 points. So when you get a score, you should view it as not really just a score, but as like a score band that is at least 100 points wide. So if you view it in that regard, then definitely it's not a thing to worry about. But there are an astounding number of problems in the software. I mean, it's surprising how many there are. So, okay, copyright notice screen. Here it is. All of these problems are from the free GMAT prep software, which is copyright GMAC. So, yes, let's do one. Remember where the multiple choice answers are found. They are found here. Go for it. Okay, we should probably pick an answer to this pretty soon. Remember the way this exam works, if you don't have, I mean, there's no such thing as not answering the problem. So, because the exam will not move on until you do. So, you can't leave it blank. I mean, if you're there and you're not answering, there's only so much that I can do, but just make sure that you're responding to the problems. Okay, so if you remember the theme today, these two things, so at least one of these is going to be present in the problems, either comma ing or issues with overall structure. So, I mean, and when you have these kind of, if you have any kind of practice that is blocked according to a theme, what you have to do is make sure that you are not relying on that to identify the errors. Like, for example, today, this sentence right here has some overall structure problems, which we're going to see. But just make sure that you have make sure that you have a mentality that's actually going to be functional moving forward. I'll tell you what I mean by that. So, I mean, the wrong mentality, the one you don't want to have, is I noticed overall structure issues here because this is a lesson on overall structure issues. I mean, even if this is true, you still have to go back and figure out the right mentality, which is something that will actually translate onto the test. Because, I mean, there's no, when you take the test, I mean, there's no signals like, oh, hey, here, this is a problem about X topic. I mean, that's not a thing. So the right mentality that you want to have is, and even if you have to, again, even if you have to construct this in retrospect, from noticing something, I knew to think about overall structure issues. And in general, the wider ranging the issue is, the more important this is. Because like when you have a subject-verb issue, for example, it's kind of obvious, right? Because you'll have, if you have a subject-verb disagreement, then something is going to have to switch back and forth between plural and singular. And that's not very hard to notice. But when you think about overall structure of a sentence, like which means is it a sentence or is it not a sentence? I mean, then you actually have to take the entire structure into account, which means because you can't randomly check that in every sentence all the time because you don't have the time to do that. So it's much more important to fill in this blank with something. So let's talk about it. I mean, how do you know that overall structure issues are being tested? Like, can anybody fill in that blank? Goes in the blue blank. So that's more of a parallelism issue. That we'll get it. We can talk about that too. Although the both and issue is an issue of parallel structure, which it doesn't generally have anything to do with the length of the underlines. Because I mean, this underline is pretty short. I mean, it's probably what 20% of the sentence is underlined, but still, overall structure. So, I mean, fragments are what you are thinking about, but you don't just notice that something is a fragment. I mean, how do you have to go figure that out after you notice something in the choices. And you can't rely on, oh, I just saw a mistake. I mean, if that happens, then great. But you can't rely on that because you can't improve that. So, same thing with this whole stuff like flow. I mean, if you think about those things, great, but it's not like you can study those and improve them. Like you can't be like, I rely on intuition only, because I mean, if you will rely on intuition a lot, yes, you will, but you can't like study that and improve it. So, I mean, it has to be something in the choices. Like, all right, here's an example of something that is a sentence. Here's a sentence. The dog chased after the ball. The dog ran after the ball. That's a sentence. Okay. Here's something that's not a sentence. That's not a sentence. I mean, if you want to call it, I mean, it doesn't matter what you call it. You can call it a fragment. You can call it a pink flamingo. It doesn't make any difference what you call it, as long as you know that it's not a sentence. But this is what you notice. What you notice is there's a difference in the choices between these two things. Because notice that there are, I mean, at the end of the day, sentences have a simple core, which is decorated with a whole bunch of other stuff. I mean, the core of the sentence is like subject, verb, the dog ran. Or like sometimes an object, I hit the ball. And then most of the rest of the stuff in a sentence is just modifiers, which is another way of saying decoration on stuff. So, and the deal is this is a verb. And this is not a verb. And I mean, when you have issues with an overall structure, pretty much this is what creates those issues. Because, I mean, the core of a sentence is a subject and a verb and sometimes an object. You can't really get rid of a subject. I mean, I don't really know how you do that. Like, you wouldn't have a subject that goes away in some answer choices. But, you know, if you have verbs that transform back and forth with modifiers, that tells you that you should look at the entire sentence and figure this out. So, and I mean, again, this is the roadblock for a lot of people, is they just like study how stuff works, which in retrospect is great, but it's not going to help you identify problems. So if I notice verb versus not verb in the choices, that's when you should start tuning into overall structure, because that's what creates the issue. So look at this. I mean, that's a verb. Comes is a verb. Coming is not. And notice that come, I mean, come is a verb there, but it's inside a modifier. So this means that you are going to need to think about the overall structure of the sentence. So smiley face, icon, thingy, if this makes sense. Some are verbs, others are not. So think about overall structure. And I mean, again, this is very simple, but a lot of people just don't do it. I mean, and I think the reason why they don't has something to do with answer keys, because answer keys just kind of declare that things are right or wrong. They're like, the problem with this choice is X. You know, which is great, but that doesn't do anything for you in terms of identifying the problem. Because I mean, you know, one thing about sentence correction is that most of the errors are not that hard to understand. Like, you don't need some incredibly subtle, nuanced understanding of written English here. I mean, that's in general, once you see the errors, they're not that hard to understand. The problem is that you have to see them in the first place. So let's think about overall structure here. Let's think about that. Let's take that to the next page. Okay. All right. Well, so methane's going to be the subject of this sentence, right? And then which blah, 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 blah. And then notice right now we are only thinking about overall structure. We are not also simultaneously thinking about other things. So that's the other thing that gives people continuous issues with sentence correction, is they just get distracted constantly. They're thinking about one thing. Oh, wait, let me start thinking about this other thing. Just like, just put it on the table. Think about it later. Right? So now about other things for the moment. Equally important. Make sure you're listening to one instrument out of the proverbial orchestra here. So, okay, methane, blah, 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 modifier. And that's where the modifier ends in 4 of these choices. All right, well, and we can mark that here too. Yeah. That means you got to have a verb there, right? Because this is your sentence. The sentence, and I mean, also, the other thing is this. I mean, when you remember what step 1 of all of these things is. Like what is step 1 of every sentence correction problem in the world? Step 1. Okay, go ahead, sure, but what do you do when you look at it? Okay, you do have to look at it. That's true. That's it. You need to figure out what it is. I mean, there's no sense in locating subject and verb unless you have a reason to do that, because that sometimes it's not an issue, in which case you're wasting your time. But yeah, I mean, step 1 is to figure out, and you definitely don't want to look at the answer choices first, because you would not know what they are doing. I mean, step 1 is figure out what the heck the message of the sentence is. Yeah. So, I mean, here, because the point is that there's going to be some main thing that the sentence is doing, and that should be the main structure of the sentence. So if you look at these words, and remember, the sentence doesn't have to be correct for you to hear this. It just has to kind of be there, and your common sense will figure it out. So if you look at this, there's a lot of stuff going on here, right? But the point is methane, and then you notice this commentary here, and then the rest of the sentence is methane comes from a bunch of places. That's basically the message. Methane, and then if you think about that stuff about greenhouse gases, that's part of the message too, although it's kind of a side point. Right, so methane, which blah, 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 comes from lots of places is basically the deal. That's what's happening there. Okay, I think once you have a sense of this, then you kind of know how the sentence has to be put together, right? it's going to have to say methane comes from lots of places. That's the other clue. So not only should you notice that there is an issue here with some things being verbs and other things being not verbs, but on top of that, you should also expect that to be a verb. So, yeah. All right. And then, if you scan the rest of the sentence, it's basically just from blah, 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 blah. So that means that B and D and E are not sentences. They're not, because they don't have a verb. Like B is methane coming from a bunch of places, period. In other words, B, D, and E are structured like this one. Those are the dog running after the ball, period. So, not a sentence. Whoopsie. So, those are gone because they are the same thing as B, D, and E. They're like that sentence. So, gone, gone, gone. All right. So we got A and C. Notice somebody mentioned this. It's not the theme of today's workshop, so we'll be brief with it. But you've got a both, and you've got an and. Let's do that in this color. And those are placed differently in these two choices. So, I mean, there are plenty. I think there's at least 3 or 4 of these workshops on parallel structure. So, if you don't have the basics of that covered already, that's where you can go. So look at it. But basically, you have a both X and Y. And I mean, those are rigid structural signals. The words both and. Like you look at the stuff that comes after them, and it should look the same, or it should at least be as similar as possible. That's what we want. We want these to be like each other. So, yeah. So let's look at what happens in these two choices that we have. Okay. All right, well, in choice A, you have both from blah, 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 and from other blah, 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 blah. From stuff and from other stuff. This is very good. We like this. This is good and it's not bad. On the other hand, if you look at what's going on in C, C is bad and not good. Because notice that the from is outside the structure here. I mean, the from is there, but it's not in the parallel structure. So you have both stuff and from other stuff. Nope, not parallel. So it's nothing. And it's gone. Main thing with today's theme, again, is the overall structure thing. And the most important point is not just that, but specifically how you notice it. Because again, I know I'm being very redundant here, but a lot of people just study how the errors work, and they just study what's wrong with stuff, but they don't think enough. Maybe don't even think at all about how to identify issues. So, yeah. There's also, the being implicated, because that kind of implies things that are currently being implicated in this, which does also clash with the whole idea that it has long been counted about. Right? I mean, it has long been counted among things that are being implicated right now. That doesn't make any sense. Like either it's being implicated right now, or people have thought about it that way for a long time, but definitely not both. That's also a valid point. Absolutely. All right, so yes. Any other questions about this one? Go ahead and chat. What is your question about that? I mean, it's both. I mean, you can't just pick those three words out and say them as an isolated thing, because then of course it sounds weird. But if you look at the overall structure, both from this and from that, then it is legitimate. I mean, you could also do that, but the from is not. If you have from both x and y, that would also work. But when you say it doesn't sound correct, if you actually mean sound, then there's the problem right there, because spoken English is not the same language at all. I mean, spoken English and written English are two different languages. And to get from one to the other, you have to translate. So, I mean, if you don't fully appreciate how different they are, just pick up a book sometime and read from it out loud. And like every single sentence will sound really weird when you say it out loud, because you're reading what is effectively a different language. So yeah, I mean, if you're using sound good, then you're in trouble. Just know that. Okay. That's basic parallelism stuff. You can also check out the workshops that focus on parallel structure for more of that. So, I mean, dude, you can argue with the problem all you want, but here, let me go ahead and find something real quick here. I mean, there is, I'm going to find something real quick. It's taking about 15 seconds to find it. Hold on a second. All right. Here we go. Okay. If you read many of my posts on the forums, I'm sure that you've seen this in several of my posts, but this. I mean, really, I'm kind of being cheeky here and sort of making humor of it, but it is very important to have the correct attitude about this. And I mean, this is the correct attitude. Is the right answer right? Yes, it's right. Is the wrong answer wrong? No. I don't like the correct answer. Who's wrong, me or them, you? I wrote another version. Is it better? No. I mean, really, guys, I'm also a professional writer, and I can vouch for the fact that the sentences in the official problems are good. They are very well written, without exception. Like, they are not bad sentences. Really, they're not. They spend a lot of time and resources editing them. So, basically, don't waste your time. I mean, the problems are good. They are well written, and it's their test. I mean, yeah, their house, their rules, that whole thing. So, I mean, you can argue with them if you want, but it's not going to serve any useful points. All right, let's do something else. Let's do the problem. What about that one? Don't forget where the multiple choice answers are found. That would be here. Alright, we should pick a thing that is a thing. If you don't have an answer, please pick one. Remember, this is an exam that doesn't let you not pick answers. So you should pick. All right. Yeah, I mean, I guess it might even seem like this is a less than parallel structure because there's a lot of parallelism going on here too. But so remember what we saw. This if you've got some things that are verbs and other things that are not verbs, you have issues of overall structure. Yes, you do. So if you look at this, well, that's not a verb. That's a verb. Has prompted. That's also a verb. It's a plural verb instead of singular, but it's a verb. And then those are also verbs. So, okay, that discussion in the sidebar, that's over. The most important, actually the only important thing in that whole sidebar is my comment that this is like 1,000 miles beyond the scope of this exam. So, like, really, that is something you would only worry about if you were a writer, and even then, you would only worry about it rarely. So, it is not worth your time to think about that at all anymore. Okay, back to the thing at hand. I mean, also, this is also a thing. Like, some people who study this stuff for too long wind up doing worse because of stuff like that. Like, you know, they start spending all their time studying these, like, tiny little aspects of problems, which are probably just there to distract you. And they slowly but surely lose sight of the fundamentals. I mean, it's actually a pattern I've seen with a lot of students. I mean, you really don't want to be studying for this exam for, like, a year or something, because, you know, the sentence correction tests fundamentals. For, you know, it's not a test that I need to know 50,000 small nuances of English. They change small things in the sentences a lot of the time just to kind of throw you off the path of the big stuff. But the sentences will have big things wrong with them. So just make sure you don't lose sight of that. You know, if your studying has become entirely focused on small nuances, it's time to stop studying and go take the test. Just keep that in mind. Okay. This. So overall, you've got, I mean, this is ultimately the core of the sentence should be something like the dog ran after the ball or whatever. But here you have two things as subjects. So you have the complexity of this thing and also the vastness of this other thing. So you have two subjects. Notice you've also got a parallel structure there. Both the complexity and the vastness. And I mean, also, remember, don't forget step one, which is what's the message of the sentence. So you don't want to go to the choices until you understand what the message of the sentence is. So the message is, you know, these two things, complexity and vastness, have made scientists call for more people. Right, or call for it. Two things that made scientists think that biology needs more people. That's basically the message of the sentence. And it needs more people in two different areas. So there are, so basically you have like thing number one and thing number two have made people think. that biology needs more people in area number 1 and area number 2. So, because remember, you want to get this understanding while you are looking at the original. I mean, the original sentence has issues here. In fact, it is the only one that is actually not a sentence. It doesn't have a verb, right? But even though you're looking at that, it shouldn't get in the way of your understanding of it. Like, you should still be able to look at the original and understand that it means this. You use your common sense to connect the dots, so to speak. So, all right. And then as far as has or have prompted, well, it's 2 things. The complexity of this phenomenon and the vastness of the biosphere. Those are 2 things. So we want a plural verb, not has. So we want have. And again, this is the importance of step 1. Like, you don't need to go back and figure out what the subject is. Like, when you see this, this is another good checkpoint to see whether you are approaching these kinds of things correctly. Like, when you see this issue, a good test of whether you have done step 1 conscientiously enough is when you see this decision point, you should already know what the subject is. In other words, it's the complexity and the vastness. But meaning, if you see this split and you have to go back and actually figure out that that's the subject, that means you didn't do a good job of reading for the meaning. Like, you should already know, okay, I see this, and well, I know what prompted that. 2 things did. So I know that I need to have prompted. But this is a very big and important point about step 1. Like, any meaning-based issue, you should not have to go back and figure out the meaning of it. You should already know. And if not, that means need to spend more brain power on just discerning the original meaning of the sentence. Not original, the correct meaning of the sentence, regardless of whether it's the original or not. So, all right. Now we got 2 things that we can use. We got a parallel structure here. It's actually the same thing as before. It's exactly the same thing as before. It's both x and y. So we can just import this little graphic from the last screen. So, well, let's see what we've got here. There's a both. There's a both. Hey, those are in front of different things. That means you're gonna get an elimination. So they work both in the field, this choice C, and in laboratories. Yeah, that's perfect. They both work in the field and in laboratories. No, can't do it. Can't have both work somewhere and in somewhere. So, and there's also, yeah, at the beginning of it, you can't combine both with as well as. That's another problem. But that's just a problem of idiom, like, you know that both goes with and not with as well as. But, I mean, D is blatantly not parallel, and that is the thing that you should be noticing about D. I mean, if you know that both can't go with as well as, that's great. That's one of those things that you either know it or you don't know it. But, I mean, this is very basic parallel structure. I mean, again, if you spell it out, I mean, if you just look at what happens in those choices, right? Choice C has both in the field and in labs. Hey, it's perfect. Choice D has both work in the field and in labs. Whoops, those are not parallel because that is not parallel to anything. So, I mean, again, this is very black and white. I mean, this is parallel, this is not parallel, and it is what it is. So, I mean, if this is not perfectly black and white to you, then you are somehow complicating this in a way that is, at best, unnecessary, and at worst, misguided. Because, I mean, this is the kind of thing that needs to be like, this is absolutely black and this is absolutely white. Because there are a few of those. I mean, but this is as black and white as that is. Like, that is singular, so it is bad. This is plural, so it is good. What? I don't understand that question. I don't understand that question. I'm sorry. Maybe you can rephrase it. But, okay. Again, no, you can't mix both with as well as. I mean, as I mentioned before, that's also a mistake. But you don't need to notice that here because you have black, white, parallel, not parallel. There you go. This is good. This is bad. So C is a winner. But just for the record, yeah, you also cannot mix both with as well as. That's not a thing. So if you happen to know that, you can also knock off C for that reason. Yes. Okay. All right. Any other questions? Go ahead and put it in the chat box. No, let's look at another one. Let's see. How about this one? Remember to think about, I mean, you should always do step one first. That's why it is step one and not step more than one. But again, be sure to understand what the sentence is trying to tell you before you look at the choices. Go for it. All right. Let's pick a thing. Still about 7 of you guys who don't have an answer yet. Remember, can't do that on this exam. You got to pick something. That is a thing. Okay. Let's talk about what the message of this sentence is. So I mean, all right. Some people are less likely than other people to basically be stuck with bad health insurance, but since this is the part that they're flipping around, we want to make sure that we know, especially what is going on in that part. So, like, what are these insurance plans? Like, how many things do the insurance plans do? They do 2 things, not 3. Because I mean, insurance plans very clearly don't spend time with people, so that's something doctors do. So, but the insurance plans, yeah, the plans do 2 things. The first thing they do is they impose limits on medical services. And the second thing they do is they require doctors to see more patients. And then what's that last part about spending time? How does that relate? Aha, right? It should be a modifier. Because, okay, here's the thing, right? If you notice this kind of thing where you have comma ing versus not comma ing, like if you have and versus comma ing, and there's a very strict difference in meaning there. Because remember, modifiers are modifiers. So if you have, I mean, modifiers, the whole point of a modifier is that you are describing the previous stuff. I mean, that's what modifiers do. But if you have X and Y, the whole point of the construction X and Y, if there's no other transition words there, is X and Y are separate things. So, like for example, if you have this sentence right here, there was construction on the highway, and I was late to work. I mean, according to this sentence, the construction is not the reason why I was late. Because that's what and does. It implies that things are separate. So, again, the way people talk with their mouths is different because they kind of expect people to fill in a lot of gaps with common sense. But if you write this sentence, then you are implying that the construction is not the reason why I was late. I mean, if you had and thus or and therefore and so, then yes. But otherwise, you're saying these are separate things. Like if you, I mean, also if you, let's say that you, let's say the animal, the insect releases all of its body fluids into its victim and kills itself, versus the insect releases all of the body fluids into its victim, comma, killing itself. I mean, these are different things. Again, the whole point of modifiers is that they are modifiers, right? So if you have comma ing, then what these do is they describe the action that comes before it. So the action that comes before in this case is that action of releasing body fluids. So in this second sentence, we're saying that's the source of the death. Like we're saying the release of body fluid is the thing that actually kills the insect. So because we're still talking about the same thing. On the other hand, the use of and between two verbs, you're saying these are separate things. So this one it's the first one. The first what? There's a lot of first sentences here. So I mean the one with the and kills itself, it just means something else. I mean if you have an insect that deposits a bunch of body fluids into a victim and then suddenly like goes and kills itself, then this would be the right idea. So I mean, that seems like a less reasonable thing, but if you had an insect that actually went and did that, then that's what it would signify. So, and again, you don't need to think about this cold. Like, the most important thing to remind yourself of is that there are answer choices in the world here. And so if you notice, because, I mean, this is going to be a very conspicuous difference in answer choices. Like, if you have a comma modifier in some of these choices, and you have other choices that are like, and other verbs, then you should think about this. You should be like, are these things separate, or are they, not separate? So, okay, well, so this, and I mean, the point is, if doctors have to see more patients, then it's not, and spend less time those are not separate things. Right. This is actually the reason why they have to spend less time with each one. I mean, if you see more of them, you are by definition going to spend less time with each one. So there shouldn't be an and there, because it's not two separate things. So you're describing this. To see more patients, therefore spending less time with each one. So this is the meaning that you want. So now that we know this, and again, the point is that you should have this figured out. I mean, it doesn't need to happen in 2 seconds flat. I mean, if you need to spend a little bit of time to figure out why this is, if you need to spend a little bit of time to figure out that this is the message, then you should most definitely spend all the time that you need to do that. I mean, that's the most important step of the process. So, but again, you should not even be looking at the choices until you know what the sentence is trying to tell you, which in this case is this. Okay. So the first thing is we got a parallel structure with these. Let's put this in green, I guess, here. Green things. Those should be parallel. The plans impose limits and require doctors to see more patients. The plans only do 2 things. I mean, the plans obviously don't spend time with people. So we need to have impose and require is what we need. Or imposing and requiring. So imposing and requiring, okay, that would work. Imposing, comma, requiring, that's not how you make a structure of 2 things. And I mean, if you interpret B as a structure of imposing, requiring, and spending, then it's just nonsense, because then you have insurance plans spending time with people. So it needs to be imposing these things and requiring doctors to see more patients. Gotta have an and there. That impose, and there's no and, so nope. I mean, again, you could read this as impose, require, and spend, but then you have this issue of you're telling me that insurance plans spend time with people again. And then the impose, limits, and require doctors to see patients. That's what we want. That's good. It's good and not bad. And then we have that impose, and there's no and, so no. Okay. And I mean, even if you interpret this as comma ing, then you would still have insurance plans spending time with people. So problematic no matter what. So that leaves us with A, alligator, and D, dog. All right. I mean, you can have this either as plans doing this or as plans that do this. Those are both fine. I mean, plans doing this implies that the plans might change sometime, but that's not really the point. So instead, we got to look at the end here, and this is where we have this distinct difference between does this comma doing this other thing, and so. But again, the meaning should be pretty firm in your mind here. I mean, this is not two separate things. It's not see more patients and separately spend less time with them. This is two descriptions of the same thing, right, that they require. The doctors are seeing more patients, and then spending less time with each one is a description of seeing more of them. You know, you divide the same amount of time by more people, you get less time per person. So that's the one that we want. But yeah, the most important thing here is that, I mean, this is all up front to figure this out. And I mean, if people are worried about time doing this, there's two responses to that. The first is that you can't worry about that because it is impossible to solve the problem without understanding this. So it doesn't matter how much time it takes because you have to do it. But also, the more important thing is that it's the most efficient thing, right? If you have this all figured out, then you know what a lot of structural aspects will have to look like. Like here, we know for sure that there has to be some form of impose and some form of require, and only 2 of the 5 choices even have. So, okay, that was discussed, but we can discuss it again really quick. I mean, there are 2 things there. I mean, the first is you know that it has to say that the plans do this and do that. But even if you interpret this as a comma ing modifier, it looks like we're trying to do that here. If you say here's a sentence that uses a comma ing modifier correctly. I dropped the bag on the floor, comma, scaring the dogs. Okay, so remember how these things are used, just the basics of this. Comma, scaring the dogs should describe this action, but it should also, the subject of this action should be the one who is most directly responsible for that, right? Like, I didn't scare the dogs directly, but my action scared the dogs. I did that. So the problem here is that you have plans that do this, right? So the doer of that action is the plans. So requiring is fine, but spending is not fine because plans don't spend time with people. So you still get nonsense here. But notice if you have this figured out up front, you don't even need to contend with that issue because you know how the sentence is supposed to be put together, which you got to have an and connecting these 2 things that are in a green box. So if you do realize that's why it's well worth whatever time you spend figuring this out, because then you can dispatch stuff like this in a hurry. It's not, I don't know what a clause is, so if that's important, then I can't help you there. But it's the previous action. So, like, you could also write a sentence like this. Let's see. My friend saw me drop the bags onto the floor, comma, scaring the dogs. I mean, so you see, this is why you don't want to get into like too much grammar or formality here, because I mean, technically the subject here is my friend, but the point is this is still the action that comes before it is still this, and so this still is describing this action, and I'm the doer of the action. Like my friend did not do anything that scared the dogs. So meaning previous action is previous action. It doesn't have to be the main verb of the sentence, and especially in a longer sentence, a lot of the time it's not going to be. So like here, it's the same thing with doctors seeing patients. Like the closest action is seeing patients. So this works kind of like that does. So yeah, I mean, it associates with doctors. There are many problems with E, which has been amply discussed. So if you just logged in and you missed that discussion, then you can watch the recording of that when it comes out next week. But everything wrong with E has been discussed at least twice. So let's move on to a different problem. Let's say, how about this one? Right here. All right, we should pick a thing. There are a lot of people who don't have a thing yet. Should definitely pick one at this point. Okay, let's discuss. And again, this is not a long problem, which means it doesn't mean it's easier. In fact, a lot of the shorter problems are harder because there's not as many different things. I mean, in fact, a lot of people have this irrational fear of the long underlines, but honestly, the problems with the really long underlines tend to be easier because there's more stuff that you can use. So, there's just, don't underestimate the shorter problems is the point. But the deal is that it should not take you this long to pick an answer to this thing because it is short. So remember, there's basically only one thing that you need to have proper time management here, which is do not do the same thing more than once. So don't look at the same words more than once unless you are looking at a different aspect of those words the second time. If you're stuck, you just have to pick something and move on. But no matter what's going on, there's no reason why it should take that long to process this, unless you're looking at the same words like 5 times. So don't do it. All right. Anyway, what is the sentence trying to tell us? So the message is that we have suppliers. They're going fish really fast, and this modifier describes stuff they're doing as they, this is more information about how they're growing the fish. So that should be a modifier. More info about how they're growing the fish. Okay. So, well, I mean, one thing you might notice pretty quickly is that there are two things in this modifier which most certainly have to be parallel to each other. In fact, I don't think anybody picked the choices that don't do that. So you can knock those out right now, right? Cutting the feed allotment and raising them on special diets, cutting and raising for sure. So those need to look like each other. So that knocks out B, boy, and E, elephant. Now let's look at the rest of this. So, okay. As far as choice C goes, I mean, again, what are they growing these things faster than? Like what? It's twice as fast as what? Suppliers are, yeah, it's twice as fast as what happens in nature, right? Like the suppliers are growing the fish twice as fast as the fish grow by themselves. So, like, I mean, there's only one thing wrong with C, but the one thing that makes it wrong is actually makes it total nonsense, which is these three words right here. I mean, growing them naturally is that is actually impossible in any context, because growing them means that the suppliers are growing them, which means that it's not natural. I mean, in nature, no one is growing them. They just grow by themselves. So, in fact, these three words are impossible because they just don't make sense. Right? I mean, like they're, in nature, no one is growing them. So they just grow. So, okay, now, this is the kind of thing that you got A and D left. So, I mean, there is a comma ing here, although considering this elimination is pretty straightforward, you don't really have to contend with it. But notice what it's doing. Comma, cutting the feed allotment and raising them on special diets. It's describing that previous action of growing fish really fast. Now, let's talk about this. How about this? Two sentences. Here's one. And here's another one. Which one of these is right? Yeah, so when you notice this kind of thing, and again, you would never have to just think about this randomly because, the world has answer choices. But, I mean, my brother's height doesn't have a height. You can't say my brother's height is 6'4". I mean, that's, you can't say his height is 6'4" tall because, his height is not 6 feet tall. He is 6 feet tall. Right? So this doesn't make any sense. but this does. I am shorter than him. So, same thing if you were like, here's another set. If you said something like heavier than an elephant, that would totally make sense. But if you have something like heavier than the weight of an elephant, then that makes no sense. Because again, the weight of an elephant doesn't weigh anything. The elephant weighs a lot, but I mean, the weight of the elephant doesn't have a weight. So, same kind of thing here. It's not twice as fast as a rate. It's twice as fast as they grow. So these rates don't have a speed. I mean, things happen at rates. But it's not twice as fast as the rate. It's kind of like 6 inches shorter than my brother's height. On the other hand, they grow naturally, doesn't have this problem. So there's our winner. I mean, there are, again, when you see this kind of difference, don't rely on seeing this in individual sentences, because that's not the point. I mean, you will, if they do something like this, then they will always have to fix it in another choice. So you'll see, if this is the thing, then you don't just need to notice it in isolation. You'll be like, aha, these choices have rate in them, and these choices don't. So, and then you just, I mean, if you rely on, a lot of people make the mistake of trying to spot errors in individual choices. But that's not a good way to go, because then you have to notice all these things at random. But here, yeah, twice as fast as the rate. Notice that there's no problem of pronoun ambiguity, and if you are thinking about that, that is a big mistake, because that is not ever tested on this exam. So as long as it's obvious what the pronoun is supposed to refer to, and as long as it actually works grammatically, then you are fine. Like, I mean, no one with any common sense would ever think that they was the supplier. So this is fine. I mean, remember that just don't. Ambiguous pronouns, do not ever think about it. So that's also an important point to put in a box. Pronoun ambiguity is not a thing on this exam. Don't think about it. Like, as long as the meaning of the pronoun is obvious, then you are good. I mean, like, you can have a sentence with a genuinely ambiguous pronoun in it. Like, you could say, you know, Jane was talking to Sarah about her husband. In that case, we actually don't know whose husband it is, but the GMAT has never had a problem like that. So, and considering our sample size is like 1,000 problems, we can be pretty sure that they're not going to wake up one day and give you that. So, yep, D dog. There it is. All right. We are pretty much right on the button of the closing time here. So that does it for this one. Thank you. And the next one is actually, I think the next one is next week. Just because I'm going to be doing some traveling for the holidays, and so the 17th isn't available. So I think, I mean, check the website just to be sure, but I want to say it's next week, the 10th, at the same time as this one. So, but check out the page, and it'll tell you. All right, that's it. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Let's kill the recording.